Palingenesis by Simon Hereward. Book 1. Progeny of Hate. Chapter 1. Hunting Trail. Lund struggled frantically to regain control over his breathing. He glanced down at his heaving chest where the wild beating of his heart drummed erratically. He was sure it had to be audible outside the tangle of undergrowth he had crawled into, for the forest itself was completely silent. He swallowed hard and passed his tongue over his dry lips. He was the last runner that he knew, for the cries of anguish and excitement had echoed through the trees 4 times already, accounting for the other chosen.
Keep your mind focused. If you're found, you will die. You cannot fight them. There is no hope in making a stand.
What was he to do then? Sooner or later they would find him. There it was. Somewhere to his right he heard the faint rustle of dried leaves. He wiped the perspiration out of his eyes, willed his heartbeat into silence, and ignored the rising panic. The broadleaf hiding him still wore the lush green coat it donned during the rainy season, masking his slithering movements with its supple moistness. The party approaching was careless by comparison. Indeed, the rustling was now punctuated with the occasional snap of a dry twig. Lund doubted whether this could be a hunter after all, or at least an experienced one. He inched forward painstakingly, one limb at a time, his eyes fixed in the direction of the telltale noise. It was dark under the leafy canopy, and his eyes were fully dilated, searching the shadows for the slightest movement. Dark streaks of soil confused the pale lines of his bare arms and legs. A cunning pattern masked his face and fair hair, while his tattered tunic blended into the murky, half-dark cloak of the forest, rendering him nearly invisible. He had wrapped the manacle with its single link of chain in a strip of cloth that morning, soon after they had been allowed to run. Kor had instructed him how to tie the strip and prevent the chain from giving away his position when he moved. It also prevented the painful chafing of the manacle on one's ankle, which, if not tended, could eventually result in a crippling infection. He gripped the crude, curved blade in his right hand till it felt like an extension of his arm, a single talon. His fear had given way to a relentless urge to destroy this approaching abhorrence, this foolishly careless hunter.
It's a beater. He will pass.
No, he would not. Not now Lund had made up his mind. The fronds parted like a curtain. It was a dark-skinned man, carrying a spear. He was alone. Lund gathered his legs under him, his pale eyes large and staring, fixed on the prey. Every muscle tensed. He drew a slow breath. The man passed within 5 paces of him. He caught his smell, that of a meat-eater, well-fed and unused to labor, a watchdog. He spent a moment on intense hate, then he leaped, snarling. The blood was warm and came gushing over the dark soil. The sight of it left him sickened and slightly perplexed, like a sobering man gazing on some destruction he had wrought in his stupor. His hands and forearms were covered in the sticky crimson fluid, and he sat on his heels staring at them, mesmerized. He allowed his gaze to travel to the corpse. True, it was not a hunter, but this man who had perished so easily had raised the whip countless times in irresistible power, had given instruction and was obeyed without question, had held sway over life and limb. Now see how quickly such power was broken.
Keep moving. They will find you. They are not all beaters.
They may perish just as easily, he thought, as he hid the curved talon inside his tunic, collected the spear and turned to leave. He had grudgingly left behind the well-crafted leather girdle and shoes, but he knew it would only point to him as the killer if he were recaptured. He ran with a long, loping stride, putting distance between himself and the dead beater. The pillared trees thrust upwards through the gloom created by their roof of green, and though he had to wind his way through them, they were the least of his obstacles. The undergrowth and ferns concealed sudden changes in the forest floor, giving way abruptly and treacherously, often bringing an unwary runner to ground, sometimes causing incapacitating injury. One had to keep one's tread light and fleet, like a dancer, floating over the surface rather than tramping, as if one were walking on water. It was a delicate act, requiring the utmost concentration and impossible to perform when fatigued. Lund had mastered this mode of pacing even before his first hunt. His body was lithe and light, well suited to running. He was still a youth, and held the advantage of resilience and stamina, combined with an alert mind, without which he would not have survived till his third run. Then, of course, there was Kor, who watched his every move in the forest, and intervened when he was able to, warning and advising. After several miles, the ground started undulating somewhat, allowing more light to penetrate the canopy of leaves. The wet, decaying smell diminished noticeably. The soil was still soggy, however, dragging on the passer-by, increasing fatigue more rapidly. He slowed his pace and then halted for a moment in a little dell. He inhaled the sweeter air leisurely, ignoring his aching thirst. The dense vegetation played with one's sense of direction, making it next to impossible to navigate. He knew the endless forest would never allow him escape, even if the hunters would. The furthest runners had not so much as glimpsed an end of the trees, though they had run till the end of day. He doubted whether there was any treeless world outside, despite the legends and tales. Didn't they also describe measureless stretches of water, and cold places where the rain floated down in flakes? There was no wind, but rather a slow fanning of the air. The afternoon advanced rapidly towards evening. A faintly sickening odor drifted through the trees to his right. It was the smell of freshly spilled blood, with which he was all too familiar. In an instant the tension crept back into his body. There was no sound. He could not have come full circle to the body of the beater, for the terrain was altogether different. Other blood had been spilled here earlier, and he knew it could only be that of another runner. In silence he threaded his way through the trees. It was a youth of not over 20 cycles, it seemed, but it was difficult to tell. The body was propped up against a tree, probably to facilitate the decapitation. It had been dead before the head was removed, for there were traces of heavy bleeding in the drag marks among the leaves. Moreover, the body had been broken, the ribs splayed open, revealing the chest cavity where the heart had been. Lund remembered the young man by the faded green of his tunic he had noticed that morning when they had started out. He had been nervous and afraid, it being his first run. He had set off at too fast a pace and winded himself too early in the day. Several small insects had already found the body, but they would have to wait. By nightfall, the wolves would move in for their feast. By morning, the bones would have been scattered far and wide.
Leave in. The beaters will find you here.
He lifted the spear in both blood-stained hands and drew back his lips from his clenched teeth in a snarl.
Let them find me. They may find more than they can cope with.
He heard them before he could smell them. They were loud and boisterous to make him run, to send him towards the hunters. There were 3 of them, dark-skinned men again, spears carried carelessly over their shoulders. He had become hatred itself. It seethed and boiled inside him, drowning his caution and reason with its intensity.
They will only slow you down. Killing 1 or 2 will allow the hunters to close in. Don't let them see you.
Blood was rushing in his ears. His mind grew numb. The spear was shaking in his grip, his muscles taut as bowstrings. He lingered a moment too long. The first man opened his mouth to warn his companions. Then his eyes grew wide in horror, and he involuntarily staggered 2 paces back, blundering into the man behind. The demon came in a savage, snarling rush, its muddy frame a smear of shadow from which eyes flared like white embers. He could feel the searing hate before the spear tunneled its way through his vitals. The breath left his lungs in a final gasp. The remaining beaters had scattered in different directions and were crashing through the undergrowth to escape the frenzy. One had sense enough to sound his horn. It was a pathetic little note, revealing the mortal fear beneath. It was enough to break through the fury gripping Lund's mind.
You're a fool, boy, a fool.
He let go the shaft of the spear and allowed the beater to fall onto his back. When he bent down to snatch up the dead man's spear, the sighting horn sounded again, this time clear and loud. In a moment, the hunting horn had answered. He was away, swift and silent, flitting into shadows with the frantic pace of the sighted quarry. He no longer had the time to scan the forest floor for a covered noose or pit. He labored to keep his breathing even, conserving his strength for the inevitable final struggle. The spear in his hand was interfering with the rhythm of his movements, and he considered for a moment casting it aside, before the stark fear lurking just beneath his calm screamed in protest at such an idea. Even if he could not fight them, he would not simply surrender to violent death. The trees and undergrowth seemed to force him into a particular line of flight, though he tried his utmost to veer off occasionally. Again he heard the raw hunger of the hunting horn, apparently keeping pace with him. It sent a prickling up his spine. Someone wanted his blood spilled, his life snuffed out for the thrill of it. They would not afford him the luxury of hate. This was simply sport and excitement. There was a definite track cutting through the forest now, the thicker jungle of fleshy-leafed undergrowth diminishing and giving way to woody stems and open patches of firmer, drier ground. It was dangerous country. Less cover increased the chances of being spotted, or the trail would very well be staked.
A trap. 10 paces.
He slowed to a walk, scanning the ground. He drew his breath in great gulps over a swollen tongue and parched throat. He was perspiring heavily, the soil smeared over his limbs, commingling with the beater's blood, matting his hair. He saw it at once. The simple noose trap was a catching net. He had to have run a long way to find one like it. This trap was not meant to slow down its victim, causing a wound to the legs, but to detain him long enough for the hunters to catch up and finish him off. He pressed himself to the side of the trail to step round it.
No, step in the noose.
What?
They have taken out the cudgels and whips.
Lund fought with his instinct. His senses screamed warnings of approaching doom, urged a mindless flight. His reason told him Kor was right, had to be right. The light filtering through the tangled thicket of branches overhead had changed in quality. The afternoon was far spent. They would have put away the bows and pikes by now. He had won through again. One by one, he unclasped the fingers of doubt round his mind, allowing relief to drown his vigilance and apprehension in a cool flood. He flung the spear far into the growing darkness of the thicket. Then he bent down and removed the rag covering the chain link. He smeared fresh soil over his blood-stained arms and hands, and then straightened up slowly. Kor was right. He stepped into the noose. The rope closed round his ankle and yanked him off his feet in a tangle of netting. There was a musty smell about the trap, as if it had not been in use recently, and had lain idle through most of the wet season. He was suddenly overwhelmingly tired, the tension of the chase having worked on his mind and body throughout that never-ending day.